Folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa here on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. It's Thursday, the 22nd of July. I'm here in central Pennsylvania, and my special feature guest today is none other than the CEO of AfriForum, Kallie Kriel, also a member of the Solidarity Organization in South Africa. Kallie, how's it going? I think we got you still on mute there.
Yes, Chris, no, it's great speaking to you, and it's going well, yeah. It's a bit colder than usual this time of the year, but we're surviving. We have other problems rather than the cold.
Well, I was going to say, Kallie, I think the two best defenses against looters and rioters are cooking oil and cold temperatures.
Yes, and well, at this stage, it seems like cooking oil is the number one repellent for looters.
Well, look, you got to give kudos to the folks at that shop right there in that mall. That was absolutely brilliant. While the South African intelligence, criminal intelligence, police services, the military, the cabinet all seemed to be completely clueless or intentionally oblivious to what was unfolding in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng. All it took was for communities to stand up together and for some very industrious people who did want to lose their jobs and their opportunity to buy food to put that cooking oil out there. For people who don't know what we're talking about, I think most South Africans know about this. Some folks in the shop, right, rather than have their store looted in a mall, went in and got a bunch of cooking oil and spread it all over the floor. And the video was entertaining. It actually kept the looters from getting in. Were you impressed by that, Kallie?
Yes, most definitely. And I must say, you know, one gets so angry if you see the looting and the thugs on our streets that sometimes you need to see something that is also humorous, although it's very serious. But I saw that video and it was actually nice to see these thugs coming down hard and very hard, especially those that wanted to run into the store and slipped. So that was great to see.
Well, Kallie, it's a real pleasure to have you on. Now, I've never had this opportunity before. I don't know if you know much about me, but I have followed your organization for a long time. I've never joined AfriForum because as a serving military member, it didn't seem appropriate. And then as a journalist, I wanted to stay objective. But I do follow what AfriForum does, civil rights organization, which contrary to the fake stream, lame stream media, and the hate sphere, also known as Twitter, which talks about AfriForum and about your officers and your organization, they seem to get it wrong completely all the time. To my knowledge, your organization has helped many groups in South Africa, including, if I'm not mistaken, some COSA groups who are looking for ideas to help them with their community, for self-defense and things like that. If I misspeak, just let me know. But these are things I've learned about AfriForum. But you're a civil rights organization and you care about civil rights of all South Africans. Have I gotten anything wrong?
No, most definitely. You know, if you just have to Google and see what AfriForum has done for all communities. Of course, we're not ashamed of the fact that we also look after the interests of Afrikaners and the Afrikaans-speaking community, or better known as the Boers in many countries in the world. But of course, we also live on a basis of mutual recognition and respect with all communities. And if you look at our private prosecution unit, the vast majority of people we assist, probably 95%, are Black people. But I think we have the same problem here in terms of the woke community, in terms of the leftists. You know, if you don't share their leftist ideology and you have conservative worldviews, immediately they try and tarnish you with false and fake stereotypes. But of course, that is an effort to silence you. We won't allow that to happen. And we are quite proud about the fact that we are actually one of the very few organizations in this country that has helped communities from across all communities. And today we started, for instance, we helped the poor Black rural community to set up an agricultural program. And today we started with harvesting. So those are the kind of things that are ignored. But of course, we are not just going to go into protecting ourselves. We're just going to go at full steam with what we want to achieve. And we won't be detracted by these false stereotypes.
Well, Kallie, there's so much to talk about here, and about AfriForum, about the recent events in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, about the announcement by former Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke that apparently it's unsafe to hold a free and fair election in South Africa. Interestingly enough, you can hold one in the Central African Republic, a failed state, in Somaliland, an unrecognized country by all but 6 countries around the world, and in 28 other African countries over the course of the pandemic, for a total of about 35 elections. But South Africa, the most advanced, the most wealthy, relatively speaking. Nigeria, we know they rebased their economy, but South Africa is arguably the wealthiest country, the best infrastructure, the best telecommunications, and it's not capable of holding an election according to this, I would say, captured, you don't have to comment on that, but captured former Deputy Chief Justice. But a lot to get to. Let's get to that in a little bit. But I actually want to take a moment here and talk about something that, now you remember Solidarity, correct? Now that's not the Solidarity that I grew up with Lech Walesa and Solidarność in Poland. But can you tell us a little bit about Solidarity, and we'll get back to AfriForum?
Yes, we have what we call the Solidarity Movement, which is a broad umbrella organization that has 18 member organizations. AfriForum is we're one of them. We are the largest in terms of our membership base. At the moment, we have 288,000 active members. But then there's other members also of the broader Solidarity Movement, where we have Solidarity, the trade union, and also the Solidarity Helping Hand, which is a welfare organization. And we, in this grouping of ours, we have a university called Academia. We have a artisan training organization called Soltech. These are all private educational institutions that we've set up. And setting up all these institutions because of the failure of the state, but also in terms of language, there's a negativity from the state towards our mother tongue called Afrikaans. And if we want to make sure that Afrikaans survives, we'll have to set up institutions and take over what used to be the responsibility of the state. But because they are failing, we have the self-help approach. Where we come from as a broader solidarity movement in terms of a trade union, there are 2 trade union traditions in the world. You will know the one is a more a socialist approach, and those are the trade unions that break down economies. Those are the trade unions that want a central state where the state looks after you. But then there's also the Christian democratic tradition of trade unions, which is an approach to say, we don't look at the state to do everything for us. We actually rather would have a small state, but we look at communities and to say communities should be able to help themselves. And it's within that tradition that the solidarity movement started. And it's within that tradition also in which AfriForum functions.
Well, you mentioned the assault there, and I'll call it assault because in my view it is an assault on Afrikaans as a language. Kallie, when I started learning, I speak 6 languages. Afrikaans, not so well speaking, but certainly read and understand it. But when I first started learning in the 1980s, after I became fluent in German, the first question I got was, what, are you racist? I'm like, what do you mean? Well, you're learning the language of oppression. You realize that the majority of people speak this as a first language are people of color, right? The people that said that. Of course, we didn't say people of color back then. It's a more recent vernacular. The majority of people actually speak Afrikaans as a first language are not white South Africans, they're actually colored South Africans. And actually, there are about 190,000 black South Africans whose first language is Afrikaans, and about 40 or 60,000 Indians whose first language is Afrikaans. So it shows a wholly ignorant standpoint. But your point about Afrikaans, it really is under assault. I mean, even Stellenbosch, the quintessential Afrikaans institution of higher learning, is abandoning and banning and dismissing Afrikaans. Reports of students there who are basically discriminated against for speaking Afrikaans at the quintessential Afrikaans institution of higher learning. It's quite shocking. There's nothing wrong with having a Zulu language-based university. There should be nothing wrong with having an Afrikaans-based language university. Now the school that you're talking about, is this the one that recently? Now let me put this in context for the viewers. The Gauteng Department of Education, primary education, spent 551 million rand to clean the schools up, the public schools, after they've been closed for 4 months. Because we all know that RNA just survives on surfaces forever. It doesn't get affected by ultraviolet radiation. So clearly they had to clean it out to make it safe. 551 million rand. If I understand correctly, that was about the same time that Solidarity announced that they had finished this school. And I think it was, you could correct me because I may get it wrong, it's 190 or 200, maybe more million rand to build it all through private donations, not a government penny spent on it.
Yes, the amount that was spent on sanitation by Panyasa Lesufi, that's the head of the education, or the provincial minister of education here in Gauteng. It was an amount of 431 million. But of course, what we see in terms of the corruption we have in the country and the racial-driven empowerment programs, they give the tenders to their friends. The prices are hugely inflated, and that then goes to self-enrichment. So the 431 million was, it's 10 times more than what it should cost. And the Soltech campus, which is an artisan training school, cost 300 million. But that also includes the residence that is being built at the moment. But of course, as you've said, that is all done by private donations, small donations by many of our members. But it also shows that, you can get a long way with funds if there's nobody stealing it, or there's no corruption, and there's no inflation of the prices, inflating of the prices. And you appoint people on the basis of merit, not because they have political connections. And I think that's the big problem why we're seeing many institutions in the country failing. It's because people are appointed because of their political connections. And that's not only in terms of what we've seen with the sanitation in Gauteng of schools. We've seen it in our electricity network, Eskom failing. We see it in our South African Airways failing. We see it in Denel and many state-owned enterprises that are actually costing the taxpayers huge amounts of money, and they are not effective. So we need to look at privatization, because we know the free market is always the solution. But a side benefit of privatization would be that you at least take the opportunity away from the politicians to steal.
Well, actually, Kallie, I'm going to have to take issue with your comment there. I think that, in fact, the state-owned enterprises are very effective and very efficient. Their purpose is patronage and favor, and they work very well at that. I mean, honestly, that's the whole purpose. Clearly, appointing rubes to the South African Airways board who know nothing about aviation and sign contracts, it's 6 times the value of any other going concern for the same services, is what gets them in this mess. No, and we could spend hours talking and unpacking about the state-owned enterprise in South Africa. It's disgusting what's happened there. And then they just make it worse. Instead of taking Eskom, the state power utility, and breaking into regional bodies that would be potentially functional and maybe viable as an enterprise, and splitting the debt amongst them, and then privatizing, maybe keeping a small portion for a national sovereign wealth fund to benefit South Africans. Instead of doing that, they break it into 3 entities. So now you've got 3 boards you can pack with your patronage friends and hand out favors. Yeah, it's just crazy. Let me get a couple questions here from the chat before I get away from it. First one here is from Rebecca Broadway. I think she's in the Western Cape in the hospitality industry. And she says, does AfriForum allow non-Afrikaans members? I'll answer it first, then I'll let you give the definitive answer. Well, of course it does. Anybody can join AfriForum or contribute to it, help it out. As Kallie mentioned, the organization helps all communities. In fact, like I said, I've never joined the organization, but I've been asked because I get a mailer because I sign up for their list. But Kallie, this is, I think, something very important to dispel right away. Your organization, while it's focused on Afrikaners and protecting Afrikaner society, for lack of a better term, is open to everyone, is it not? Am I missing something here?
No, most definitely. Yes, most definitely. You're not missing something. You're correct. We call ourselves an inclusive Afrikaans organization. The vast majority of our members are Afrikaans speaking, but of course, everybody is welcome to join. And what we've also seen now with the riots in our country, there was good cooperation, not only among Afrikaans-speaking people, but amongst various language speakers. And we are willing to cooperate and accept anybody that wants to become part of our organization. The fact is we have a huge challenge in the country, and we need to mobilize people over a broad spectrum.
Yeah, there you go. So there's your answer, Rebecca. I mean, I think it's important because it's kind of like I interviewed is it Stridum from Oranje last year, and it's just amazing what people think about that place. You hear the nonsense spewed by the likes of Julius Malema, and others. And Oranje is a private corporation. It's a private town, and people are welcome to settle there. But the things that people say about it, it's kind of like AfriForum. People things say about AfriForum that are wholly not factual. They're based in innuendo, rumor, and myth, and also propaganda by people who want to undermine what you're doing. Now, there's another question here from Mr. Punisher, and I think by CFR he means the Central Firearms Registry. He's asking, let me just get back to that real quick and see if I can find it from Punisher. I don't want to forget that question. It was just before Rebecca's question, so let me see if I can find it. Oh, yeah. Do you have any information, Kallie, about what's going on at the Central Firearms Registry and license applications? I don't know if that's something you deal with, but I thought I'd ask that question very quickly.
No, it's most definitely something we deal with. You know, there has been visuals also in the media on the huge backlog that there are with regard to the firearms registry. There's also the company, the tech company that was hired to handle the IT behind this. They turned down the system because the government stopped paying them. So there's a huge backlog. I speak of myself. At the moment, I had to renew, or in February, I put in my application for a renewal of my firearms. And it's now, 5 months later, and still nothing that I've heard on that. So, these things should normally, it should actually take 30 days, but they say within 90 days, but that is not happening. But of course, we say to people, don't let this dishearten you. Of course, in the end, if you have to apply to, in the end, get your license. And it's important for us to have people arming themselves simply for self-defense. And as we've seen with the riots, the first line of defense would be to be armed and to act within the framework of the law. And you have this saying in the US, the only person that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And in that sense, we need to mobilize ourselves. The only way that we will have peace is if we are armed to be able to protect ourselves.
Absolutely. Of course, being an American, the cherished Second Amendment rights that we have here and the widespread lawful ownership of firearms is something that's definitely part of our culture and our experience. And, in many ways, speaking specifically about Afrikaners and Boers and Trekboers, the history of Afrikaners and Trekboers is very much akin to the westward expansion of the United States, the sense of independence, of God, of faith and family, and banding together to protect yourselves, commandos, and and defense, those sorts of things. It's a very similar trajectory. And when if you look closely at American history and Afrikaner history, it's a very fascinating sort of thing. But the firearms thing, honestly, are these idiots from what is it, the firearms, or what is it, trying to get rid of firearms in South Africa? Is that dead now? Do you think because of what's happened in this past? I mean, people are waking up and realizing that if it wasn't for lawful citizens defending their communities, there would have been wholesale carnage. It's unbelievable the damage in KZN alone, but it would have been wholesale carnage had it not been for local communities of Zulus, of Indians, of white South Africans banding together and mixed neighborhoods protect themselves. Do you think that will finally put this issue aside, or are they going to keep trying to take your guns?
Well, I hope so. But Chris, I just want to make a comment with regard to the similarities between Afrikaners and America in terms of history. I think the pioneering spirit, people going on track, and the pioneering spirit and the conservative values that flowed from this pioneering history of ours, I think brings the similarities. And we are proud of also that we are also people of pioneers. With regard to the firearms, one can only hope that it is going to be set aside. as we are speaking at the moment, it is still something, it has not been removed from the discussions. And the proposals that are on the table at the moment that was published by government is that you will not be allowed to carry a firearm for self-defense reasons. You're not allowed to reload your own ammunition. You might be able to have, for instance, a hunting rifle, but every time you're going to transport that rifle, if you're going, for instance, to go hunting, then you have to get a permit. And you can imagine if we don't really have the capacity in our government to provide services, basic services. So if you now have to have a permit, if you want to just travel somewhere, you can imagine what kind of administrative backlog we will see in that regard. But I think many people, we are law-abiding people, and we want to act within the framework of the law. But I can't see that, especially now after the riots, and we've seen the only protection for many communities were the fact that they were armed, not that they had to necessarily use the firearms, but merely the fact that these looters knew that these people barricading these roads are armed, served as a deterrent. So I can't see how law-abiding citizens will abide by a rule that says you have to hand in your firearm if we know that the state does not have the capacity in terms of the police to do its basic job and protecting the lives and property of its citizens.
Well, that's a great point. And here in the U.S., the tradition of the Second Amendment actually is a bit different than firearm ownership in South Africa. I mean, similar sort of things in that it was a method for defense, for hunting, for those sorts of things. But it became part of our Constitution less because of concern about crime, which certainly would be a reason for deterrence in South Africa, why you'd want to have it, and self-protection. But the reason it was embedded in our Constitution, enshrined there, was to defend us against the overreach of the state, because we broke away from the United Kingdom because the monarch was all powerful and was dictating terms with we had no say in the matters. And so one of the cherished things, of course, the Constitution wasn't the first form of government. We came out of the American Revolution. We had the Paris Peace, and we got our independence earned in 1783. And we were under the Articles of Confederation, which didn't work very well. It was a loose confederation. So we came up with the Constitution, and we enshrined in it the right to keep and protect, keep and bear arms, which is really guarding against government overreach. We've seen Australia be disarmed, Australians. We've seen it in New Zealand, and we see what happens. Those states have become arguably totalitarian fascist under this pandemic. The things happening in Australia are just mind-boggling. The arrest of people being rounded up, the abuse of people, it's quite shocking. I would say right now probably Australia is the worst, shortly followed by Canada, of all places, right after that. And South Africa is not far behind with the National Coronavirus Command Council, the undemocratic, unelected, capricious, and unaccountable body that just makes decisions out of thin air. But of course, Kallie, they consult their scientists. Scientists, we don't know who they are. We've never met. We can't question. I think it's just a bunch of sangomas using muti, and they're tossing the bones out there and coming up with ideas. But that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, but actually, if you just listen to the name, the National Command Council,
yep.
There's still this Soviet type of ideology in terms of centralizing power, making sure that you have control over as many spheres as possible. And of course, unfortunately, we've seen that the coronavirus has given our government the opportunity to use this as an excuse. But the problem is, they're focusing on the soft targets. We see quite often, the other day, there was a story of an elderly couple that went for a walk and did not wear their masks. They were arrested. But then you have, during the riots last week, and you have outside of Jacob Zuma's house in Nkandla, you have masses of people not wearing masks outside, because we also have a curfew here at the moment, where you can't be on the streets after 9 o'clock at night. But these looters went in the middle of the night and looted, and they got away with it. So it seems that the government wants control, but then they focus on the soft targets, and those are the law-abiding citizens. And the real people where the state's power needs to be used against, those looters and thugs that are burning and stealing, they're not acted against, or only a small portion of them have been caught. So we would have liked to rather let the state, if they want to act, rather act where action is needed.
Well, you make a good point there, Kallie, and let me just unpack a couple things of that and then get your thoughts on it. Well, first off, Bekele, the Minister of Police last year, with glee held a press conference during the first lockdown when they had arrested 230,000 normally law-abiding South Africans for what they considered to be crimes under the lockdown. Most of those things were initially declared unconstitutional by the North Gauteng High Court, but apparently that was thrown out later on, that judgment overruled. I really don't get how that was done, but regardless, I still consider, based on how I read South Africa's constitution, that most of what they're doing is unconstitutional, but neither here nor there. Bekele was excited that he had arrested 230,000 people, the vast majority of which, by the way, were minority South Africans, because when the SANDF, the military, and the police service, SAPS, went into the townships and informal settlements, they were abusive, and they killed 11 or 12 black South Africans in quick order, including Collins Kosi, and they got bad press, and they immediately pulled back out and stayed out of there and weren't involved. So they were happy to arrest largely minorities, yet they seemed completely absent on the 20th of October at Senekal in the Free State, when the economic freedom fighters trashed rubbish bins and tore down street signs when they had gone there ostensibly to protect property. And prior to that, they were missing in action when Julius Malema urged and exhorted his followers to attack the Clicks locations. They attacked 43 Clicks stores, firebomb, petrol-bomb one of the stores. Then on the same day, on the 20th of October, jumping forward again, we had the number 3 in the party stand up there singing and switching from languages to make sure it was clear in English that burn the Boer, burn them out, burn them down. Within 72 hours, 92,000 hectares in the Free State are on fire from arson, and in the Northern Cape. And they allow this lawlessness. And then we jump forward. So people are encouraged that, they're not going to do anything. Then we see, as you mentioned, in Nkandla, when Jacob Zuma had 5 days to get his affairs in order, he not only didn't get them in order, he cheekily asked for a rescission from the court that found him guilty. And then he holds court. He stands out there with thousands of his followers, and he says, you must rescind a decision against me because I'm in ill health. I need care every day. I'm not healthy. It's dangerous. I'll die because I'll catch the Rona. But he stands there without a mask on around thousands of people singing and dancing at Nkandla, and not a single person arrested. And then it happens again, and they let this thing build up. So what the government told South Africans is that we're only going to enforce these rules against certain people. And I forgot to mention the EFF in Pretoria, when they threatened the South African the Medical Products Association, if they didn't approve the Sputnik and they didn't approve the Chinese vaccines in South Africa, that they were going to cause chaos if they didn't do it within a week. And 7 days later, magically, the Chinese vaccine is suddenly approved after that blackmail. But there were about 6,000 EFF members standing shoulder to shoulder, toy-toying, and no consequences. All these people breaking lockdown. The only people I've seen arrested for breaking lockdown are Carl Niehaus, an ardent Jacob Zuma supporter, and Andile Lungisa, who is a convicted criminal who was just suspended for 18 months from the ANC. Both of them are Zuma supporters. That's the only people seen to be getting arrested now. That was a lot, Kallie. I mean to go on for a long time, but basically the government has tolerated lawlessness, and it begets lawlessness.
Yeah, I think then the chickens come home to roost. If you're going to allow a culture of impunity and lack of accountability to reign, and you're going to allow people on social media to make hateful comments, to provoke violence, to make racist comments with regard to minority communities in our country, to promote violence, and you're not going to act in that regard, and you are going to allow people to, on grassroots level, to do things and they get away with it, then the message is, it's free for all. And that is what we saw, the riots that we saw last week. The spark for it was the internal faction fights within the ANC. But when that spark was lit, it created a platform for criminals to just fall in and thugs to start stealing. And the reason why they did so, not even hiding their faces, because there's a culture of or lack of accountability and the culture of impunity. And if you look at just how people, some of them did not even run when they looted. They walked into the shop slowly, took the stuff, did not even hide their faces. If people act in that way, it sends a message to say, well, they know that they will not be acted against and they will get away with it. And that is the main problem in the country. Our criminal justice system has deteriorated quite drastically in terms of the police. During the Zuma years, the National Prosecuting Authority was weakened because the people that felt strongly about justice, many of them left. They were replaced by political stooges of the Zuma regime. And so we have a weakened criminal justice system in the country. And that, of course, makes it hard to make sure that there is accountability. But, I don't just want to speak doom and gloom. I think there are solutions for us here in the southern tip of Africa. But that is if we say, well, we realize that what we are seeing at the moment is that this government is not going to be able to create a future for us, even if they have a change of mind that they want to do good. The fact is they also don't have the capacity or the ability to do so. So what we need to say to ourselves that we have to take our future into our own hands. There's enough people in the country that have the ability, that have the know-how, that have the energy to do so and the will to do so. And we need to mobilize these forces to make sure that we form strong, self-reliant communities where we can build a future, not because of government, but despite government.
Well, Kallie, that's one thing I have to say, and I don't want to sound like a fanboy, but I do want to congratulate AfriForum on the midst of all of the chaos. And as a journalist who reports in South Africa, it's hard not to report on the chaos. And I'm not just talking about the last couple of weeks, but of all the terrible and evil things that happen. I've seen that AfriForum forges ahead. It seeks ways. It's almost as if some people in South Africa have realized that, as you said, this government isn't serving anybody. Well, in my view, anybody except cadres and their patronage machine. They don't serve black South Africans, white South Africans. They serve their interests, which is a small number of South Africans that are fleecing the country in so many ways. So it's not going to serve the country. And then, of course, you always have an informal sector in the economy where people are scraping by, and that's in every country around the world, but especially in Africa. But it's almost like there's like a whole parallel part of society now, which you have to produce your own services, you have to generate your own electricity, you have to create your own security forces. I mean, South Africa has almost 600,000 security guards. That's insane for a country of 60 million.
Yes, well, it's 4 times the number of what we have police officers, but that's because of the necessity. But I think what you are saying, the self-reliance and getting solutions to the problems, that's part of the pioneer spirit that I think you also had in the US. If you go on the frontiers, then you have to rely on yourself and the people with you to make sure that you are able to make things work. And we are in that stage. So in a sense, it's I don't want to complain too much. We love this country. We don't like the government. We love justice. We hate injustice. We are free marketeers in a country that is socialist. But of course, we also believe in the power of our communities to build a future. So we've actually astounded by how well it can go if you mobilize in terms of our community safety structures. We have 160 neighborhood watches across the country, with about 12,500 volunteers. But what we've seen, 12,500 sounds as if it's not a lot. But if you have 12,500 people that are trained well, that know how to plan, that know how to get an operation going for defending a community, what you then see is when something such as this happens, the rest of the community becomes involved, but at least you then already have a structure where these people can just fit into. And in terms of technology, drone technology, for instance, is a multiplier. We are training, at the moment we have 61 trained drone pilots, but of course we still need to make sure that that number goes quite high. But in terms of the technology with night vision equipment, you can actually use such a drone to protect the community by using it to see where the threats are and be able to make these to make people act. But what we also see, if you use these drones and you simply just put on a bright light from the drone on these people, they start running. So you can actually have a multiplier effect. If you're a minority, you can use these kind of technologies. And we've seen over that work, if you have good radio communication systems, the communication centers that we have. Unfortunately, of course, we can't guarantee the safety of all farmers and of everyone. We still have too many murders in our country, but at least we're not only at the mercy of the police.
Well, folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa here on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. My special feature guest today is none other than the Chief Executive Officer of AfriForum, the civil rights organization in South Africa, Kallie Kriel, also a member of the Solidarity Umbrella Organization. And we're talking about self-reliance and trying to talk about some of the more positive things rather than focusing on all the bad issues. But I guess a phrase that a lot of Afrikaners know is "een boer maak 'n plan." So you always got a plan there. So, and that's kind of what we're talking about, self-reliance here. YouTube user, which is not the most original username, I should say, but one of the people in the chat says, I've seen many times AfriForum volunteers cleaning and working around my street. So thank you guys for caring. Ons sal self. Okay. A nice thing to say. And then Joking Atheist says, for Kallie, if you build self-reliance, how does that help? Well, he can answer that in a second, but because who is to say that your self-reliance infrastructure does not get looted again in the future? Well, that's an interesting question, but I think it's predicated on the premise that the self-reliance infrastructure has been looted this time. I don't think the self-reliance any infrastructure was looted. It's all public infrastructure, and private corporations like cell phone towers, radio stations, and water treatment facilities were looted. I'll let you answer that, Kallie. Then I want to come back to the drones and tell you a little story about that as a former intelligence officer. But go ahead.
Okay. Yes. Well, we also have, through self-reliance, have to protect our own infrastructure. So the whole, if we're just going to say, well, everything is lost, well, then it is, of course, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy because everything will then be lost. But what we are looking at the moment, our strategy is to look at what we call a concentration strategy. The problem is, in terms, if you look at Afrikaners, the problem is not our low numbers. We more or less 3 million, and with other Afrikaans speakers, we between 7 and 8 million. So it's a big number of people, relatively speaking. But the problem is that we are spread all over the country. So you don't really have an economy of scale in terms of numbers of people concentrated in specific areas. But what we have seen with the deterioration of what we call the platteland, it's the smaller towns that have actually mostly collapsed, unfortunately. We've seen a migration of people to bigger towns and to cities. And if you have large numbers of concentration of people that you can mobilize and form self-reliant communities, you will be able to defend yourself. And that is what we are working towards.
Excellent. What I want to say about the drones is that last year, around this time last year when I was interviewing people, I was told by some of the Afrikaans speak community that I was naive. The drones won't do anything to stop rural insecurity and farm murders and things like that. And I said, well, of course they will. You just have to, I'm not talking about the DJI 15 minutes and the battery dies drones. That's not what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But remote sensors also play a role too. Trust me, as a former intelligence officer, remotely placed sensors can give early warning. Now, you got to use them correctly. You don't want cattle or sheep to set them off, but when people invade property, there are very effective ways to use them, and that's not even being discussed. But as you start to allude to there, is that drones, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, if you have the right ones, you can get those things that can stay on station for hours at a time, and they're not $1 million devices. We're talking about a few tens of thousands of dollars, and a community can band together and use these things effectively to patrol. You have all kinds of sensors that can go on them. You got a command center, early warning alert. It's very sophisticated, and frankly, if the South African Police Service wasn't in such disarray and politicized, it ought to be something they're doing, but they're not. Of course, we saw the withdrawal of the commando system over a decade ago, 168 regiments of the commandos on the spurious ground that was a race-based organization, which is nonsense. It was a community defense organization. In fact, the 4 most recent regiments in the commandos were all black. They were all Zulu-based. And in fact, for most of the members of those regiments in KZN, it was their only form of formal employment when they would be activated on the weekends to do coordinated search operations, mandrake seizures, rural security, augmenting the police, that sort of thing. But the drones, I was told, I was naive, Kallie, by South Africans, that it can't be used for civil defense. It seems to me that you probably agree with my assessment that it could be a very useful tool.
No, well, probably one of the best tools that we have access to. So that is something that we have started focusing on big time. Of course, unfortunately, many of the big challenge.
Looks like we got an internet connection issue there. Kallie's connection froze for a moment. Are we still streaming? Yep. Yep, he's frozen. I'm still streaming. Sorry about that, folks. This connection's frozen. Hopefully it will reconnect there in a second. Let me just go ahead and switch this to speaker view so it's just me. All right. Oops, no, he's frozen on there, so he hasn't come back. It's still listed as him being on there. That's really strange. Interesting. Well, I'm still here. Can you guys still hear me? Let me get a thumbs up if people can still hear me in the chat. Okay, can you guys still hear me? Let me know. Or if we got another problem here. Okay, he's dropped off. Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, well, hopefully Kallie Kriel will be back in just a moment, folks. There were other questions people were asking. I couldn't get to all of them. I'm still trying them. Hopefully he'll come back in a moment. Don't run off. Kallie Kriel is my guest. Please don't run off. He had some load shedding, possibly. Maybe he'll call back in his mobile. So we'll give him a couple moments there. Hopefully we'll get him back. Thank you for letting me know you can hear me, guys. Yeah, it probably is load shedding. Although it's an odd time for load shedding, it's probably a failure because it's quarter to the hour. Normally you wait until the top of the hour. There's no future for the Afrikaner and the socialists. Oh, there was a question a couple times here by Kevin Johnson, I think it was. Let me find it real quick. Kevin said, how do we cope when one side is buying pet insurance, population dropping, and the other side is buying nappies, growing population? Well, the problem with that argument is that it may be true, but it's not entirely accurate. Let me explain. South Africa's fertility rate has dropped precipitously, and mostly amongst black Africans since 1994. It's gone down considerably. Now, the reason South Africa's white population is stagnant is because so many people fled the country. They've moved abroad. You've got a lot of white South Africans living abroad and a fair number of colored and black South Africans also living abroad. But without those people living abroad, South Africa's white population would be growing modestly. The reproduction rate is there. You have 2.8 million white Afrikaners in South Africa and 2 million other white South Africans, so just under 5 million. But that figure probably should be closer today, upwards of 7 million, if it were not for people having left the country over the past 3 decades. It's really been a big drag on that population. If you go back to the first population study in South Africa in 1911, first time was done, white South Africans comprised over 21% of the population. Kallie's coming back, so don't run off. Here he comes. So they comprised over 21% of the population back in 1911. Today, it's down to about 7 or 8%, but that's a number of factors involved in that. So, Kevin, that kind of answers your question. Let's see if Kallie's coming back now. So, Kallie, as your audio connects, I suspect that the red ants are beating at your property there. Are they out there trying to remove you?
Chris, we've now seen firsthand experience what load shedding means.
It was load shedding. Okay.
No, I fortunately at my house, you now have to, in a sense, to have self-sufficiency. I have a battery system. Mm-hmm. that it was connected during the daytime to solar to charge the batteries. But of course, if the power goes off, you have to go back onto the battery system. So I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
But at least the battery is now running. So and the Wi-Fi is working again. So I'm back. Sorry about that.
Well, we actually, I gained a couple of viewers. I don't know if that's just because they streamed in or what, but while you were gone. So, yeah, there was a question I fielded here a moment ago from Kevin Johnson asking about a declining white population and increasing black population in South Africa. And I said that may be true, but not accurate from a standpoint that the fertility rate in South Africa has declined precipitously, particularly in the black community since 1994. And it's actually, you're getting a proper, pyramid or growth, for the age cohorts. So while there are larger numbers of black South Africans today, that is tapering off as that population fertility decreases. And in fact, South Africa's white population is artificially low because so many white South Africans and colored and black, for that matter, have left the country and gone abroad. If it wasn't for that natural rate of population growth, South Africa's population white population would be increasing modestly if it wasn't for that. So the question from the gentleman was, well, the answer here is that people need to fix their country, and then South Africans need to go home, and then you'll all be happy and things will work out. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yes, maybe just in terms of the population growth, if we speak in race terms, the white community has the lowest population growth. Actually, our birth rate per female is 1.7. So it is a declining number. But what we've seen in terms of technology, medical technology, life expectancy is growing. Mm-hmm. So even though our birth rate is low in terms of the growth of life expectancy, we have not seen a decline in terms of a natural decline in numbers, except for that what you mentioned, people leaving the country. So there will be a steady decline over the next. We've done our research in terms of the numbers in 2030. Mm-hmm. In 2030, we will start going steadily downwards in terms of numbers. But as we say, the bigger problem is the fact that we are spread all over the country, which creates a situation that you are actually in a minority everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that is our bigger challenge. But of course, the decline in numbers, that is what happened because Afrikaners are more a first world westernized cultural community. And what you see in westernized first world countries is that the population growth or birth rate declines. But that is something that's happening throughout the West.
True. Christoph Avanga kindly shared information with me, which I'm well aware of, being a cultural anthropologist, among other things, my academic qualifications. But he said the population replacement rate, fertility rate needed to maintain the society's population is 2.1. That's correct. 2 adults must produce at least 2.1 in order for your population to stay stable and grow. The last time I checked, South Africa was down to 2.4 right now as a nation. Now, of course, as Kallie said, for white South Africans, that's lower. It's below the replacement level. But for the nation, it's leveling off. And that's for a number of reasons why that happened. A lot of things play into that. But Kallie, let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about a topic that I think a lot of people misunderstand. I want to get your take on this, if you don't mind. If it's not something, I'm sure you're comfortable talking about, but if you're not, just let me know. And this is something I've been warning about it for a long time. People have been losing their mind about, because for years, there would be somebody in the African National Congress, member probably would propose a bill to do expropriation without compensation. Of course, Section 25 of South Africa's Constitution allows for the state to use what we term here in the States essentially eminent domain. In the interest of the state, for the public good, they can take land here in the States, but they have to compensate you fairly. Now, in South Africa, they can do the same. They can take property, which is more than land. But if you take someone's pension fund, you have to compensate them fairly. So if it's R1,000,000, you got to give them R1,000,000. So it's a wash. So it doesn't really accomplish anything. But you can take land and redistribute it to other people. And so there's been a big focus on land and expropriation. Of course, land is a very controversial topic in South Africa for good reason. But what I've been warning South Africans about is that this is not about land. It's about two things. Number one, it's about property. And you need to understand that, because the government of the day can and will use this as a cudgel to silence dissent or anyone that challenges them. So for instance, let's say that the Constitution's amendment and property can be taken without compensation. Well, if you're an outspoken critic of the government, you might find that your pension fund's gone, your bank accounts are cleared out, and someone's coming to kick you out of your house. Well, that's not farmland. It's about property. And I think that people need to understand that. Any thoughts on that? Is that something you guys take a look at?
Yes, most definitely. It's worrying because the expropriation bill and the changes to the Constitution is not about land, just about land, as you've mentioned. But even people that might think it's just about land, even if it is just about land, it simply has a devastating effect on everything. And it's not just us thinking so. I think there has been examples in the world. We have had here close to our borders, Zimbabwe. Closer to your borders, there's Venezuela, where one has seen what happens if you disrespect property rights. Even if I don't have a farm and property rights are disrespected, it's going to have a detrimental effect on me and everybody else, also poor Black people, because you're going to have disinvestment. And you're simply going to have a hyperinflation, as we've seen in Zimbabwe. In the end, food shortages, in the end, fuels shortages, and you'll have a collapsing currency, which will wipe out people's pension funds. So, it's actually too ghastly to contemplate. And that is why we, in South Africa, we've taken a strong stance against this. But sometimes you think, how can these people want to do it? Because they know what's going to happen. But that's also what people in Zimbabwe, farmers from Zimbabwe, tells me, is they thought that Robert Mugabe would never do this because it is quite clear what is going to happen. So we have to use other methods as well. And that is why Ernst Roots, who you spoke to before, and myself, has gone to the US to garner support. Because we need the international community to put pressure on the South African government. During the years of apartheid, there was a lot of international pressure also from the US on the South African government, which led to change. Now we have a new situation, but we have another government that is becoming extremely racist, that is acting in a way that is not acceptable in terms of human rights. And we also then need the US government to put pressure and other governments to do so. Because if you look at, go and read the strategy and tactics documents of our ruling party, the ANC, they use the kind of ideologies that was used during the Cold War by the Soviet bloc, and that is the balance of forces. They say, well, we will do what the balance of forces allows us to do. And if there's not going to be a strong pressure on them, they will say, well, the balance of forces allows us to do so, so we'll just go ahead with this. So that is why we need international support and international community putting pressure on the South African government to say, if you're going to go ahead with this and disrespect property rights, this will be the consequences, and hopefully sanity will prevail.
Well, sadly, I unfortunately don't think the international community is going to come to South Africa's rescue. A lot of people thought that Trump was going to save South Africa. While I voted for Donald Trump twice, it wasn't a priority for him. Obviously, only briefly mentioned. It's unfortunate. And the world seems to not care. They seem to be stuck on the 27th of April, 1994, Rainbow Nation, end of apartheid, yada, 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 kumbaya. And that's where the world seems to be stuck. That's one reason why I try to do coverage. I do the whole continent, but I do focus Southern Africa and South Africa in particular. It's very frustrating. But it's quite crazy when it comes to land. We look at every example of states taking ownership of land, and it's an utter disaster. China, millions starved to death. The Soviets collectivized 20 million peasants starved to death intentionally during the 1930s by the Soviets. We look at land confiscation in Zimbabwe. By the way, 42% of all the land, the land designated as commercial farmland by the government, was purchased after 1980. Under a majority rule government of Prime Minister and then President Mugabe with the government's consent. Nobody could buy one morsel of land in Zimbabwe unless the government approved it because they had first right of refusal. And for about 13 years, the British government gave them a total of 63 million British pounds, which was worth a lot more back then, to purchase farms on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. And they did. But they went to Pierre Shiri, and they went to Constantine Chiwengo, and Solomon Mujuru, and Robert Gabriel Mugabe, and so on. They didn't give them to war veterans or poor black Africans. And 42% of that land was bought and then stolen. And now the state owns all the land. So you have no collateral. You know, I tell you, Kallie, let me get your thoughts on this. If the South African government cared about poor black South Africans with the RDP houses that they built, they would issue title to those houses, to the occupants today, thereby creating billions of dollars of instant equity, which is dead capital sitting there under the control of states. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you own an RDP house, it's no great shakes. It's a little, it's a small house, but you have that plot, you have that. Now you own something. You can go to a bank and you can borrow money if you have a good reason for it and you're at good risk. And now they've got collateral. But without the collateral, you can't borrow money. Same with farmland. If you haven't got something the bank can take when you don't make payment, then you're not going to get the money. And so if they cared about black South Africans, they would not make them dependent on the state by living in land occupied and controlled by the state and granting land tenure. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that'll work?
Yes, most definitely. I think title deeds are central for a growing economy. And that is the biggest problem in terms that you have the state that is using words like redistribution and giving land to black people, but they don't give anything away. It's actually just they're nationalizing it because everything like the RDP houses, but also the land is in government control. And if you go and look at the statistics, that the land that was taken by government, only 5% was then put on title deeds for a black person. 95% of that land is owned by government and simply just given on loan, or people are allowed to use it. But if you don't have title deeds, you cannot go to a bank to get a loan. You then don't have access to resources to buy seeds and input costs in terms of farming. So what this government is doing, they are setting up black farmers for failure, because it doesn't matter who you are. If you don't have access to input costs, you cannot then make a success from that. So I want to agree with you totally. I just want to say, in terms of international support, I think you are correct about the fact that it's all about every country's own interests, and I don't have a quibble with that, because I think every government's first responsibility is towards their own citizens. But what I think also the West should know is where we've seen the collapse of countries in Africa because they did not respect property rights. What has then happened is that China has moved in. And we've seen that in many countries, but also now in South Africa, where China is actually recolonizing Africa and taking control of large parts of land, loaning money which countries can't pay back in the end, and then giving them ownership of strategic assets such as harbors and electricity utilities. And we're seeing China moving into South Africa in a big way. And if the Western powers are going to withdraw in terms of investments when property rights aren't safe, then China is going to move in. And I think that is also a threat for the West. So in terms of self-interest, I think it's also important that we need to make sure that we don't create fertile ground for the Chinese to to take over the country. And we are already now seeing in the Limpopo province, the Chinese are going to invest hugely there. One of the farms that one of our members there was an effort to expropriate it. It was one of the farms on the list that leaked out. And in the end, it came out that the Chinese needed the resources on that land to make sure that this development of them will work. So that is also something new that's coming to the fore that we need to keep a watch on.
No, absolutely. Excuse me, just clear my throat there. I was sitting in Lilongwe when I was stationed in Malawi, just down the street from our embassy there, and I went to have lunch, pizza. This is back in 2009 I was there. And I was in my fatigues, my battle dress uniform, because I was doing business with the Malawian Defense Force. And a gentleman came over to me and said, "Oh, you're an American." And I could tell from his accent that he was from Southern Africa, even though I was in Malawi. And we started talking, and it turns out that his father was ethnic German, his mother was an Afrikaner. Grew up in Zimbabwe, owned a farm. It was stolen from him, and he was now working as the farm foreman on 100,000 hectares of farmland leased by the Chinese government for 99 years in Tanzania. That's exactly what you're getting at. The Chinese do have interest everywhere. So, wow, that was something else. I'll never forget. There's a lot of comments over here, people saying things in the chat. YouTube user said, "I'm just so proud of the fact that we as a people came together, resulting in solidarity, building the Soltech campus. What a huge achievement in the Afrikaner community." And then someone else also said, yes, Nico Jacob says it was finished below budget, ahead of schedule, how out of fashion with the times. That's true. All that's true statements. There's some other chat here. People are saying that AfriForum is not really accomplishing anything. It doesn't stand up to the Marxists. Others are pointing out that you're not a political party. You're a civil rights organization. There's probably some merit to some of these comments, but I'm just mentioning a few of them here. But so we've talked about the expropriation without compensation. Can we shift a little bit? Do you have a little bit more time, by the way, because we got interrupted there we lost some time. Can you stay a bit longer, Kallie?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, cool. I don't want to overstay my welcome or ask you to stay too long, but this has been a fascinating conversation so far. But let's shift focus to what's been happening since the lockdown took place and the fact that the government has not stepped on people when they break the rules in a major fashion. For instance, Senegal on the 20th of October last year, Brackenfell on the 20th of November, when 100 EFF supporters are allowed to come. A judge foolishly gives them permit to harass this school. On the spurious claim that it's racist because there's no black teachers there. I don't see the EFF protesting there's no white Afrikaans-speaking teachers in schools in the Eastern Cape or in KwaZulu-Natal. That's kind of like we saw this thing at the UEFA Championship for football, for soccer in Europe. And the comment The Economist said isn't it the most distinguishing feature about the Italian team is there's no people of color on it? So people's response to that is show pictures of the team from Benin. Isn't it fascinating that the most striking feature of the Benin football team is there's no white people on it? Or Bafana? Isn't it fascinating that there's not a single white member? So the point is, it's just a ludicrous thing. But they went to Brackenfell and they were authorized 100 people. 3,000 to 5,000. And one of my responsibilities as a former counterintelligence agent is estimate crowds. And for the footage I saw, there were easily 3,000 to 5,000 people there, somewhere in that figure. It was hard to get a good at because I wasn't present on the ground. But and they came with knob carries, pungas, and golf clubs, menacing and toying, running through the streets like there's some sort of impy trying to attack the school. And they got water cannon, but no consequences. Julius Malema's not arrested. Nobody in his party's arrested. And then we see what happens in Nkanla. Does the government not contribute to this nonsense? And are they not? You don't have to state this. I don't want you to put you in a spot here. It's a rhetorical question, I guess. Is the government not responsible for its failure to act to encourage lawlessness? And now we see it unfold in these riots in KZN. And this is just crazy.
No, I think definitely we can say government has behavior of lack of action has created fertile ground for this lawlessness. And we're seeing this not only in terms of looting of shops and physical criminality, we also see it in terms of the looting of taxpayers' money, which is just a more sophisticated thing that is happening. And, there are some people that have used the example to say, if you have senior politicians looting state coffers, and getting away with it. Why won't you have people that are poor and physically looting shops because they can see they can get away with it? So as I've previously said, I think the chickens have come home to roost, and hopefully, one can always hope to say we hope that this will lead to more action against people that transgress the law. But also in terms of self-sufficiency, we set up in AfriForum a private prosecution unit, which is headed by Advocate Kallie Kriel. More internationally known, probably people in the international community would know the Oscar Pistorius. He was called the Blade Runner that took part in the Paralympics. He shot his girlfriend on Valentine's Day, and Kallie Kriel was the prosecutor in that case. So he's with us now. And then we privately start prosecuting people where government does not prosecute them. Of course, we only have we have 8 people in that private prosecution unit, which we believe is the best team. It's the same team that prosecuted former police chief Jackie Celebi, who was also the head of Interpol, and he was jailed with this team that we have. But we take it bit by bit. We don't have the capacity to solve all the problems, but at least we are going after senior politicians. You know, in terms of Julius Malema, who acts with impunity. He assaulted a police officer, and he also shot with a firearm into the air unlawfully, and there was simply nothing done against him. So what we then did is with Kallie Kriel's team to say, okay, if you're not going to prosecute him, we want to privately prosecute him. And in the end, it forced them to change their mind. And as we speak, Julius Malema has appeared in court several times for that assault of the police officer. He has also appeared for the illegal firing of a firearm. So we're doing our bit to make sure that people are held accountable. But it's a slow process, but we're moving forward slowly but surely. But it's also, again, a fact that we had to set up our own infrastructure to be able to prosecute people, to get government at least to move in the right direction.
Well, it's interesting you should mention. There's a couple things I want to unpack and get to a couple topics here very quickly. One is gender-based violence. I'm not aware of what you guys do, but somebody just mentioned you're doing some brilliant things about that. And then, unfortunately, I want to get to plasmod, farm murders, before we finish, just to talk about it briefly. But Advocate Kriel, I would love to interview him. He, of course, is involved in that case that's being followed or that's rolling out in Botswana. Of course, I used to live in Botswana, so this case with Ian Khama and is it Ramaphosa's sister-in-law or something like that, or that's involved in this? That's a very strange case, and not that I want to ask him to speak about that, but I'd love to interview him sometime. So maybe you can put me in touch with him. But yeah, a lot of people say the Bulldog. He's an excellent attorney, excellent advocate. So well done. Yeah, Oscar Pistorius. We could talk about that one for days too. That was a bizarre case. But somebody said in the chat that AfriForum is doing some really brilliant stuff with women being abused. I assume they're talking about gender-based violence. Is that a field that you guys are involved in as well? I'm unaware of that.
Yes, no. We've, I think at the moment we probably have 5 ongoing cases. But again, it's where the criminal justice system fail people, women that are raped or abused. And then they go to the police and simply nothing is done and there's no prosecution. So we started with a number of those. Kallie Kriel was in the Eastern Cape last week for a prosecution of a female that was raped. Also, within a month's time, the George Bezos, the son Alexi Bezos, will be privately prosecuted by Kallie Kriel for breaking 6 of his wife's ribs during a tussle. So, and again, in that specific case, in many of the cases, women are actually left in a problematic situation simply because of incompetence or a lack of will to work by the police. But what the case is in terms of Alexei Bisos, we believe there's also a political motive where they did not want to prosecute somebody that was the son of somebody that has a history as part of the ANC. So that case we are now privately prosecuting, and we are looking forward to at least make sure that there is accountability.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Kallie. I was unaware of what AfriForum. So you do so many different things. You work in so many different fields. It's quite amazing that you're not overstretched there. Well, speaking of being overstretched, Jesse Rondelhoff in the chat says AfriForum must please come to Mitchell's Plain. So I stretch you a little further there. Come help people out Mitchell's Plain. Definitely a place could use some attention. Now, if I could shift to this topic, and the reason I'm shifting to it is not to talk about because it's a really tragic and sad one, and also I'll explain to you how I characterize it, and if you disagree, I'm happy to hear that, or if you agree. But this is something that most people outside South Africa, if they've ever heard of AfriForum, they've heard of it in this context. It's because of the groundbreaking and the serious work that AfriForum has done in the realm of plaasmoord or farm murders that have taken place in South Africa. This is not a new phenomenon. It's gone on for decades. People, having been a dairy farmer, been a farmer myself in my youth in high school, I know that on a farm you're isolated, even in a place that has the good rule of law. And oftentimes farmers have things pilfered from them, even if people aren't being murdered. But you're isolated because you're remote and it's difficult to get to people. So that puts you at a vulnerability to start with. But the nature of farm murders in South Africa, that we've seen unfold over the past couple of decades in particular are particularly violent, horrific, and oftentimes involve torture and disfigurement and horrific things that are just beyond. I'm not going to describe some of those things here, but AfriForum has done a brilliant job of documenting these things, trying to find mechanisms to protect communities, to try to help them. And it's now, this is what I want to share with you, Kallie, from my perspective, and this is why I want to get your take on it. I have been telling people inside the intelligence community, which I can't share what I said, but when I was in government, and since I've been out of uniform and publicly, I've been telling people that this is a rural insecurity issue. And it's always been a problem, but the removal of the commandos was something that contributed greatly to it. The politicization of SAPS, the underinvestment in SAPS, all of that taking place, but also the fact that it's not taken seriously by the officials. It's called ordinary crime. When you disfigure and remove people's body parts when they're alive, that's not ordinary crime. There's something else going on there. And it's also characterized as just revenge. Well, it's not just revenge, because many people on these farms get along perfectly fine with their farm workers and farm managers. I've always argued that there are criminal syndicates here. When you see people with body armor that's nicer than one I had on active duty in combat for the U.S. Army, captured on video surveillance with radio jammers so they can block cell phones and things like that, this is not your average crime. This is organized syndicates doing this. Now, what I want to say about this, I talk about rural insecurity because it's not, the reason I mention this, Kallie, I'm sorry I go a little bit long here, but the reason I mention this is because when farm murders are brought up outside of South Africa, we always hear this from the leftists, oh, they're just whining about white genocide, because that label attached and some people grabbed onto that. Whether that's true or not isn't germane here. Rural insecurity and farm violence is the real issue here, in my view, and it affects everyone. We saw last year in August the 26-year-old Indian woman on the Ayub farm in KZN, 4 months pregnant, taken in the bathroom, her 2 children left in the bedroom, and they sliced her throat from ear to ear and killed her. We saw the black, very successful commercial cattle farmer in the Free State who was robbed at his meat shop there on his farm, shot in the head by the gangsters, and then he was in a hospital in a coma for 4 months. He got him out. He survived for 2 months and then died of that wound. We have seen Edward Neumeister, an Austrian immigrant to South Africa 40 years ago, who owned a restaurant in KZN, a German-style restaurant, not a farmer, attacked with a panga and mortally wounded, yet somehow managed to stumble into the kitchen to help to attack the attacker so his partner could escape. This is an ordinary crime, and this affects white, black, colored, Indian South Africans, and I think that's important. Now, if you disagree with anything I'm saying there, but I get frustrated when the international media paint it as people whining about white genocide, whether that's genuine or not. I'm not even talking about that. This is a real serious problem, and every farmer that's killed, every farm manager that's killed has a far wider effect on South African society and its economy than anyone can even recognize. Have I missed something in there, Kallie? Please correct me if I got something wrong.
No, I think you spot on in that regard. And I think, well, one cannot say just stereotype and say this is the reason for farm murders. I think you have to look at, you have to look at every specific case. But if I want to mention what are the broader issues that might play into this, I think there's amongst certain criminal parts of our society, there's a lack of respect for human life. And where does that come from? During the previous dispensation, the ANC started what they call the People's War.
Yep.
To make the country ungovernable, and you had the kind of violence where necklaces was used, the tire putting it around somebody's neck and burning it. So we still have that where there's amongst the majority of all people in this country, but there are elements that simply have no respect for life. Then what you are right, I think it's because farms are far away. That is also something. But something that we are also worried about is the fact that there are statements made to try and demonize farmers in our society. And if you have a situation where your chances of being murdered if you're a farmer are already twice as high than that of a police officer, then people should be very careful on not inciting people against farmers. And that also happens in terms of the media. There was an incident in Kulini where two farm workers on farms, Afrikaners, were arrested and accused of murdering a young boy. Mm-hmm. In the end, when we looked at the facts and saw that they were innocent, we supported them, and they were not found not guilty by the courts. But if you look at that incident, that incident got more media coverage in our country than all the farm murders in 1 year put together. Yep. And those are the kind of things that to try and demonize farmers, to say, these are racist people, these are bad people. While we know the opposite is true. These are people that want to make a contribution to the country, people that does quite a lot to uplift communities. So the demonization of the farming community is a huge problem. But then also the fact that the police simply don't have the resources. Sometimes even if there is a police vehicle available, sometimes they don't have fuel, or sometimes the vehicle is broken and not fixed. So I think there's a large number of issues at play here that we need to take note of. But firstly, we need to get government to realize and say this is a priority crime, and not because we say farmers and farm workers' lives are more important than other lives. But, in our country, if there's a specific kind of crime that you need to focus, for instance, and somebody from Mitchell's Plain said AfriForum needs to go there. We are moving into the Western Cape. You should just watch this space. But there's a specific unit against gang violence. And we're not saying, that shouldn't be because the victims of gang violence lives aren't more important than other lives. It's because gang violence is a real problem. We have a unit against rhino poaching because rhino poaching is a real problem. And therefore, farm murder should also be a priority, because there's specific circumstances and you need to have a specific strategy to tackle that. And if you have that, at least, then you can put resources into it. And we are willing to cooperate with government and the police to make sure that we make rural communities safe. But because that is not happening, we have to now go the route to say, we need to put in successful farm watches, neighborhood watches. We have to use drones. But the problem is we don't get tax income. Government get taxes and they have to look after people's safety, after education and all these things. We don't get a tax income. But now we have to start doing stuff that government has to do. But because they are failing, we have to do it ourselves, which makes it a bit harder because you don't have necessarily all the resources that you need to do this successful.
No, absolutely. It's quite frightening. Of course, I've spent a lot of time in Pretoria and especially in Hatfield, and to see that now it's I was getting to priority crimes, cash in transit. I mean, so many white and black South Africans have been just murdered for no reason. I saw one a few months ago in the video someone was recording of a Bucky pulls up and a bunch of guys jump out with AK-47s and the guard offers no resistance. He just opens the door. He stands there. He puts his hands up. They push him to the ground and they put a bullet in the back of his head and just murdered him. For what? He was in his 20s. It's the culture of impunity, which you've used. That's the right phrase. The culture of impunity. Brett Kebbel, one of the most closely tied people to the ANC back in the day, murdered in broad daylight in Sandton City, the most exclusive, expensive square mile of real estate in Africa, and murdered in broad daylight. We saw the taxi boss in Port Elizabeth shot in broad daylight this week. Unbelievable, this culture of impunity, because this government allows it to happen. And it's just really crazy what's going on here. Now, so thank you for that. That's very helpful from that perspective to talk about it. And I agree. It's and that's what I've been saying all along. There are many reasons why these things happen, and there are many vulnerabilities. There's many cases to it, but to simply dismiss it, it's quite frightening. Now, along with the Western Cape, Kyle Green ZA just asked if you have an office in Cape Town. Does AfriForum have any presence down in Western Cape at all, or are you just getting there now?
Yes, well, we actually have had a presence in terms of the fact that we have members there. Mm-hmm. But what we've seen over the last year or two is that the support for us in the Western Cape has grown substantially. So at the moment, that is the second biggest province in terms of membership. Of course, in Gauteng, we have 39% of our members. The Western Cape is now 14% of AfriForum's members, so it's the second biggest province, which is about 40,000 people that we have as members there. So at the beginning of April this year, we opened up an office there. So that's our first office that we have in the Western Cape. It's staffed now with 7 people. But we are working now specifically on a Western Cape strategy. One of the issues that I think is important, I think the problem we have in the country is not just the government, but also the political system, in a sense that you have the centralist approach, where it's easier to loot, and it's easier to abuse power. And we are federalists at heart. In terms of, as you have a federal system in the US, we believe there should be bigger federal powers for the Western Cape, because you now have a guy like Bekisele going to the Western Cape and terrorizing people on beaches with heavily armed policemen, while he has lost nothing there. The police, for instance, we believe in the Western Cape should be under the control of the Western Cape. So we want to promote the federalism idea in the Western Cape, and we are going to put a lot of resources into that.
Absolutely. Not just as a personal question from one of my viewers. They ask if they could contact you privately regarding a legal situation result of her farm attack that happened a few years ago. I don't know how Kallie will respond, but my answer would be to go to the website and send an email. They're very responsive. Kallie I went to Facebook and sent you a note, and it said write to AfriForum, and I had a response within 24 hours. So should she do that then, Kallie? Is that the right approach?
No, yes. We have an address, afriforum@afriforum.co.za, and we have somebody staffing that email address full time, and then they will refer it to the relevant people. If it's with regard to a farm murder, it will be referred to our community safety division at AfriForum. So she's more than welcome. But if you have direct contact with her, you can even send her my personal email address. I have no problem with that.
All right, I'll do that then, because I do have direct contact with her. Anyway, listen, Kallie, I could probably talk to you for hours and hours and ends, but then I would never get you back because you'd be afraid to come back on my channel. So discretion is going to be the better part of valor here. Look, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Also, thank you for your promptness. When I asked you to come on the program time, it was almost instantaneous. You said, sure, happy to do it. And we were able to set this up very quickly. So I'm very grateful for that. And I think that there's a very important theme here that came out earlier in the stream, and it was interspersed throughout this conversation. And it's one of hope and one of self-reliance and communities working together, which it seems to me that it seems to be important to AfriForum, and certainly must be the path forward, not simply despair over brutal murders, over gender-based violence, over pervasive state looting, all these things, that South Africans have to band together and find a way. And I suspect that for millions of South Africans who had blinders on, the events in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng and the lack of government response or the abject failure of the government. Now, some police officers acted heroically and did amazing things, but across the board, law enforcement simply wasn't there for the community. I think all of that has lifted the blinders off of several million South Africans' eyes, and maybe that will help contribute to building something better. Have I hit it on the money? Is that kind of what AfriForum is really about, is trying to make things better and focus on self-reliance and community working together?
Yes, most definitely. And I think you're also spot on in a sense that in terms that self-reliance has now become something that people see as necessary. You know, when we started off 6 or 5 years ago with these community safety shares and all of these self-reliance projects, you know, there was a lot of accusations in the media saying, oh, these people want to form a parallel state and how terrible this is. And now you have the same media outlets praising the citizens for taking law and order into their hands, and the citizens actually coming to the fore to make sure that there is stability. So we're glad that we started this off a long time ago, that we've been able to put up things in structure. So we're not starting from zero, but most definitely you spot on this. What happened the last week is definitely going to give us further momentum to make sure that we are able to build a bright future here. My ancestors have already been here for more than 300 years, from more than 300 years ago. And we will be here for another 300 years and thereafter. But we just have to take on our own responsibility to say, we're going to build a future. We're not going to become despondent. We're not going to give up hope. We're going to continue. And that is why I'm not despondent. I'm actually happy to be here in Africa and to raise my children here.
Well, South Africa is an absolutely amazing country with fascinating people and an interesting history, to say the least. Not to mention the gorgeous topography of the country, the various different environments, subtropical to high desert. It's amazing. The mountains of Drakensberg, take your pick, the Western Cape. It's a beautiful place, wonderful people. It's a shame that it suffers under the governance that it does, but really good words to say there, Kallie. That's impressive, 300 plus years, but I got you beat, brother. Got you beat. My 17th great uncle arrived at Jamestown as the first royal governor of the Jamestown colony, Virginia, in 1623. So in 2 years, I'll celebrate 4 centuries. We'll start our 5th century of Wyatts in North America. So just slightly ahead of you there.
No. And the thing is, I'll never be able to catch up.
That's true. You can't catch up. But listen, very quickly as we wrap up, Kallie Kriel, is there something people should know? Should they visit your website if they're curious, if they want to learn more? What can they do? Is there a newsletter to sign up for, an email? Can they become a member? And if you don't mind sharing that, because I'm sure there might be some interest amongst the audience here.
No, we also started a section for people in the international community that want to support us. And there's an easy web address, friendsofafriforum.co.za. So people are more than welcome to go and have a look there. We also send out newsletters to those people that are there. But you can also go to our South African website, afriforum.co.za. We have an electronic newsletter that we send out on a weekly basis where people can subscribe to. Our website is also bilingual. So if you go to afriforum.co.za and you don't understand a word what you see, just look for the icon to say English, and then you'll be able to go to the English website. But all our media statements are there. So people will get quite a good idea with regard to what we are about if they go and have a look there.
Well, my guest, Kallie Kriel from AfriForum, the chief executive officer there, and also a member of the Solidarity. We've talked about some really hopeful things. They also talked about some of the challenges South Africa face. And in the midst of this, we dealt with the daily realities of South Africa as Kallie's power went down. He had to switch over because of load shedding. So there you have it. Kallie, thanks a lot. It was really a pleasure. Bye, donkey. I'll try to get you back on the channel sometime again if you'd like. I'd love to have you back on. It was a real pleasure. And you've got some real good people working for you there. Ernst van Saal, Ernst Rich, really good oaks. Can you hear me?
Yes, no, it's inspiration. These young guys working with me. Yes, I could hear you. No, it's inspiration to be able to speak, to work with those young guys. But thank you very much. Bye, donkey. And have a great evening. And also to everybody watching. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, Kallie Kriel from AfriForum. I'll let him drop into the waiting room there. Let me put him in there, make sure we got him there. Okay. All right, that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It was very interesting from my perspective, and I'm very grateful to Kallie. He was a quick arrival when I asked him to come on the program. It's made for a very fascinating week this week, right? We had Big Daddy Liberty yesterday. Tsile Nkobese was on the program yesterday. Today, Kallie Kriel. Tomorrow, Dr. Peter Groenewald from the Freedom Front Plus will be on the channel. Next week, Ian Cameron will be on the channel, as well as I will be on Cliff Central. Gareth Cliff's program that's now scheduled for next week. We'll be recording a program next week, and then I'll go on his program live later on to talk about some of the issues in South Africa. So I'm very excited about that. I'll be on Joe Emilio's program on Tuesday, and on Tuesday, Mark Oppenheimer, the constitutional attorney for South Africa, will also be on this program. So I haven't even got through the week, and I'm already knackered for next week because there's a lot going on. That includes my trip this weekend to Atlanta for the conference final for the Major League Rugby season. Rugby ATL Atlanta versus Rugby United New York. So, folks, thanks a lot. I'll do a Night Owls stream here a little bit later, and then I'll be packing and getting ready for my travel tomorrow. So, thanks a lot. Be sure to smash the like button on your way out, and I'll add the link that was mentioned here by Kallie on the Friends of of AfriForum. We'll put that in the description of the video. Be sure to let people know about the stream and the interview, and we appreciate your support and patronage here on Chris Wyatt Africa. There was a super chat earlier on. Thank you for the super chat. I didn't see any new members, but thank all of you for your time and your patronage. God bless and have a lovely day. I'll see you back here on Chris Wyatt Africa in about 2 hours from now. 1 hour and 59 minutes on the Night Owls. Cheers, everybody. Be safe out there, and don't trust a commie, as Big Daddy Liberty says. And as I say, never trust a Democrat. There's not much space between them. Cheers, everybody.